Since when do we let an old black animal like you breathe the same air as real officers? Look at me when I'm speaking to you, boy. Did you honestly think that plain jacket makes you look like you belong in my precinct?
Solomon Grant said nothing. His gaze stayed level and steady, and completely unbothered. And that only made the heat climb higher in Boone's face. And with a sudden, vicious sweep of his arm, Boone kicked the heavy metal bucket over with everything he had. Crash! A violent wave of filthy gray water burst through the air and slammed against Solomon's mirror-bright leather shoes, soaking through to his socks, splattering up the legs of his slacks.
Look at your boots now, Chief. Pathetic. Now pick up that damn mop and get to work, or I'll personally throw your trash asset onto the curb where you belong. You are nothing here. Get out!
A hostile roar of laughter went up from the senior officers crowding the wall. They looked at this quiet, gray-haired black man, and they saw a piece of garbage who would swallow the humiliation and be grateful they let him breathe. They mistook his cold silence for weakness. They mistook his stillness for surrender. What none of them understood, not Boone, not one of the men laughing against that wall, was that they had just crossed the single most dangerous man in the building. And tomorrow morning, this same janitor they had told to crawl on his knees was going to walk to the front of that room in full dress uniform, as their commanding captain, holding every single one of their badges in the palm of his hand, before we watch this rotten precinct get taken apart from the inside. One board at a time. Do me a small favor. Drop your city in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if you believe that a man's dignity can never be stripped away by anyone else's badge, hit that subscribe button right now. Because the justice coming for these officers is slow. And total. And absolutely worth the wait. Now let me take you back to the beginning of that week. And to exactly how this trap was set, because a man like Solomon Grant does not walk into a building like this by accident. Eastgate Station sat on the east rim of Calder City, like a place the rest of the department had quietly agreed to stop looking at. Brick the color of an old bruise. A parking lot that flooded every spring. A break room that smelled of scorched coffee and floor wax, no matter how many windows you cracked. It was the 12th district on paper. Everyone who worked there just called it Eastgate. And everyone who worked there understood one thing before they understood anything else. You did not make waves at Eastgate. Not if you were smart. Not if you wanted your days off to stay where they were. Or your beat to stay in a neighborhood where the backup actually came. Or your name to stay off the wrong list. You kept your head down. You laughed at the right jokes. And you learned the exact shape of the man who really ran the place. That man was Lieutenant Wade Kessler. Kessler was 51 years old, with 24 years on the job. A thick neck, a slow grin, and the particular calm of a man who had never once in his life been made to answer for anything. His name was not on the commander's door. It never had been. But from the newest boot to the oldest desk sergeant, everyone at Eastgate understood the truth of the building, the way you understand the weather. Kessler decided who worked what. Kessler decided whose complaint went upstairs and whose complaint went into a drawer. Kessler decided what happened here. And what happened here was whatever Wade Kessler wanted to happen. Commander Ray Alvarez had transferred out 11 weeks earlier. Good old Ray, who never asked a hard question. Never opened a drawer he had been told to leave shut. And never once in 6 years told Wade Kessler no. In the 11 weeks since Alvarez cleaned out his office, Kessler had spread into the empty space like water into low ground. He was writing the duty roster himself. He had quietly overridden 2 directives from downtown. He had started answering the commander's desk phone, and more often, calling himself acting commanding officer. He held no such title. He did not appear to care. Travis Boone was his weapon of choice. Boone was 29, built wide and mean, the kind of young that had not grown into itself yet and probably never would. He had found Kessler early and attached himself like something that does not let go. And Kessler kept him close, because a man like Kessler always has a use for a man like Boone. Boone was the one who said out loud the things Kessler only let himself think. He was the one who made the new transfers cry in the locker room and called it hazing. He was the one who decided, years before Solomon Grant ever walked through that door, that Eastgate belonged to a certain kind of officer and that everyone else was there on his sufferance. Sergeant Dwayne Halpern laughed along from the end of the table. Halpern was 56, red in the face, so far into his bitterness that it had stopped looking like bitterness and started looking like a personality. He believed, down in the marrow of him, that 22 years of service had bought him the right to say and do exactly as he pleased. He was also the station's union delegate, which meant that when Kessler needed a piece of paper to move a certain way, Halpern knew which forms to reach for and which to lose. Officer Paige Whitlock sat near the middle and laughed along with the rest. A beat behind. A little too carefully. She had figured out early that laughing along was the surest way to keep from becoming the thing they laughed at. "You want to know what Ray's problem was," Kessler said that Monday, standing dead center in the break room with his coffee mug in one hand. "No spine." The man couldn't discipline a parking cone. He waited for the laugh. "He got it. New commander's supposed to start today," said a duty officer, passing through the doorway without stopping, without eye contact. Kessler didn't miss a beat. "Yeah, I heard." He waved a hand like he was shooing a fly. He had done his homework on the incoming captain, the same way he did his homework on everyone. Pulled the personnel summary. Read it twice. Hunting for the soft spots. Downtown transfer. Heavy on administration. Some stretch on a federal task force, which to Kessler meant a man who had spent years in meetings, not on the street, no history in Calder City, no relationships inside Eastgate, brought in on the back of that consent decree the department was still choking on, which to Kessler meant one thing and one thing only: a babysitter, a paper commander, a downtown favor with a badge, sent out here to sit pretty and check the boxes some federal monitor wanted checked. An old desk jockey from downtown, Kessler said, swirling his mug. Man probably hasn't cleared a call in 15 years. He'll come in here wanting to change things. They always do. And they always leave the same way. Tired. Wondering what hit them. Eastgate had chewed through 3 commanders in 7 years. Kessler had helped with every single one. You did not fight a man like this head on. He liked to say, you just made the building heavy. You let the paperwork pile up. And the little things go wrong. And the days grind him down. Until one morning, he woke up and put in his transfer, just to make it stop. How long you give this one? Halpern asked. Kessler thought about it for exactly 1 second. 90 days. If he's tough? He raised his mug toward the center of the room. Slow and deliberate. A toast. He won't be tough. Nothing changes at Eastgate. Gentlemen, not today. Not ever. Boone lifted his cup. Halpern followed. Even Whitlock raised hers. Just slightly. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. And somewhere across the building, through a side door that opened and closed almost without a sound, a man in a plain jacket and mirror-bright shoes walked into Eastgate Station. And nobody turned to look. Solomon Grant had been reading men like Wade Kessler his entire career. And his career was a long one. He was 57 years old. With 31 years on the job and gray coming in hard at his temples, and he had spent more than half his life learning how buildings like this one worked. He knew how men like Kessler moved. He knew how they held a room. loud and loose and certain, right up until the moment the floor went out from under them. He had made a life out of walking into stations that ran on fear and quietly taking them apart from the inside. And the first thing he had learned, the thing that had never once failed him, was to see a place exactly the way it truly was before anybody in it knew he was watching. So that Monday morning he did not walk in wearing gold. No captain's bars. No dress blues. Nothing that would make the room snap upright and start performing the second he crossed the threshold. He wore a plain dark jacket, gray slacks, and shoes he had shined that morning out of 31 years of habit. And clipped to his belt was a small, unremarkable badge that, if you glanced at it, might have said facilities, might have said contractor, might have said nothing at all. He had chosen it precisely because people's eyes slid right off it. That was the point. That had always been the point. You do not learn the truth of a place by asking it to behave for you. You learn it by letting it forget you are there. He drew a coffee from the pot in the corner. He carried it to a table off to the side, where he could see the whole room and the room would not think to see him. He set a small notebook beside his cup. He picked up his coffee. And he watched. He watched Kessler hold court. He watched Boone perform for Kessler. He watched Halpern's sourness and Whitlock's careful, frightened laughter. And over in the far corner he watched a mid-career officer sitting alone with a cup she was not drinking. Not laughing. Not looking away either. Just watching the whole room with the still, careful face of a person trying to solve a problem she does not yet have all the pieces of. He watched all of it. And then Travis Boone crossed the room and saw a gray-haired black man in a cheap jacket sitting where he had decided no such man belonged. And the ugliness that lived in Boone every single day of his life came up out of him and found a target. You already know what happened next. The bucket. The gray water across 31 years of shined leather. The word animal, said out loud, in a room full of officers who were sworn to protect every person in their city and who laughed instead, the demand that a 57-year-old man get on his knees and crawl for the privilege of standing in Travis Boone's precinct. Solomon Grant reached for the paper napkin beside his coffee. He folded it once. He bent down, unhurried, and wiped the water from the top of one shoe. Then the other. The way a man wipes his hands when he has finished a job he always knew he would have to finish. He set the napkin on the corner of the table and squared it neatly with the edge, and when the laughter had finally moved on to something else, he took out his pen, opened the notebook to a clean page, and wrote one word, Boone. He looked at it for a moment. Then he capped the pen, slid the notebook back into his jacket, and picked his coffee back up. And he did not look at that wall of laughing men again. Across the room, the officer with the untouched coffee was still watching him. Her name was Camille Ford, though he did not know that yet. He felt her eyes on him. He glanced up once and met them across the room. And neither of them said a word. And something began in that room that neither of them could have named. Because here's the thing the men against that wall could not see. The thing that Boone, in all his loud contempt, would never understand until it was far too late. The man they had just told to crawl was not a victim who had wandered into the wrong building. He was the reason all of them were about to lose everything. Every insult Boone spat that morning, every laugh from that wall, every second of it, was walking straight into a file with a date and a timestamp beside it. They thought they were humiliating a stranger. They were confessing, 3 weeks earlier, in a glass office, 40 floors above Calder City. Assistant Chief Priya Raman had slid a thick folder across her desk and said nothing while Solomon Grant read it. He read every page. She let him. She was a small, precise woman with iron gray hair and the stillness of a person who has spent a career learning exactly how much to say and not one word more. and she had not touched her coffee since he sat down. The folder was Eastgate. 6 years of it. 9 complaints filed against officers at the 12th District in 4 years. 9 dismissed. Every one of them reviewed and closed inside the station. By the same short list of names. Before it ever reached a desk downtown, 4 officers who had requested transfers out of Eastgate rather than fight whatever it was they had found there. A records trail full of clean, bloodless holes where the real story should have been. Reports that did not match their own timestamps. Complaint copies that had never been signed for. An entire quiet architecture of things that had been made to disappear. And near the back, flagged with a single yellow tab, a file that Grant read twice. Darnell Hayes, 31 years old at the time, graduated the academy 3rd in his class, assigned to Eastgate full of everything a department says it wants. 2 commendations in his first 6 months. A letter of thanks from a middle school principal on the north side. A woman named Ruiz, who had written in her own hand that Officer Hayes was the first cop her students had ever asked to come back. A clean sheet. Glowing reviews. The words natural and steady under pressure in his instructor's own handwriting. And then, in month 7, the file turned to ash, reassigned to the worst beat in the district. The Rennick Corridor. High call volume. Thin backup. The stretch of the city the senior officers quietly avoided. No reason noted. Month 8. His first write-up. For paperwork, he had filed late on a night he had been ordered to cover a double. Month 9. A second write-up. For insubordination. The details so vague, they said nothing at all. Month 10. Darnell Hayes filed a formal complaint. 3 pages. Dates. Specifics. The whole ugly pattern laid out in a steady hand. It was reviewed inside the station. It was found to lack sufficient evidence. It was closed. He was never told. Month 11. His transfer request came back, denied in 48 hours. Faster than the system was ever supposed to move. Month 12. 2 sentences of resignation. And a man who put his uniform in a box and walked out of policing for good. Grant closed the folder slowly and looked up. "Tell me what the file doesn't say," he said. Raman looked out the window for a moment. Then back at him. "Wade Kessler is not stupid," she said. "That is the first thing you need to understand about him. He looks like a loud, ordinary man, and that makes people underestimate him. And once they underestimate him, they stop paying attention. That is exactly what he wants." She folded her hands. He has spent 24 years building a machine inside that station. Officers who owe him. Officers who are afraid of him. Officers who have done things they would very much prefer no one ever looked at closely. He holds all of it. And he holds it lightly. And it has never once cost him a thing. Travis Boone is his knife. Kessler keeps his own hands clean and lets Boone do the cutting. And if it ever comes apart, Kessler will hand you Boone and walk away whistling. Do not let him. And outside the station, Ramon was quiet for a moment. "Gordon Alcott," she said. "The way you say the name of an old injury. Deputy Mayor for Public Safety. Every dollar this department spends runs through his office. He and Kessler have never signed a thing. Never needed to. Kessler keeps Eastgate quiet. No headlines. No oversight. No reason for anyone downtown to come look. Alcott keeps the money flowing, and the questions few. It is a clean arrangement. It has been clean for a long time. And the monitor, something in her face eased. Very slightly. You already know about the monitor." He did. 2 years ago, after a different scandal in a different part of the city, a federal judge had put the entire Calder City Department under a consent decree and appointed an independent monitor to watch it. a former federal prosecutor named Eleanor Voss, who reported to the court and answered to no one inside the department, and whose office had already flagged Eastgate twice in its quarterly reviews for a complaint dismissal rate that made no statistical sense. Voss cannot open an investigation on a hunch, Raman said. She needs it built. She needs it clean, sourced, dated, airtight. And she needs someone on the inside of that building who can put it in her hands. That is you. If you want it, she looked at him. I have to be honest with you about what I am asking. You are 57 years old. You have a clean 31-year career and a pension waiting, and every right to spend your last years somewhere that will not try to break you. That station will try to break, and I cannot promise you it will not succeed. Grant thought about the file, about a man who had graduated third in his class, and gotten a letter from a principal named Ruiz, and put his badge in a box. He thought about a room full of children who had asked a cop to come back. When do I start? He said. The roll call room filled the way it always filled on a Monday. Loud by the door. Quieter toward the back. Coffee cups scraping the long tables. Radios crackling and getting turned down. Kessler's crew took the same seats they always took. Center left. Close enough to look engaged. Far enough that they never had to be. Nobody paid much attention to the man already standing near the front in a plain jacket. Boone glanced at him and leaned toward Halpern, and muttered that the facilities guy was still hanging around. And Halpern didn't bother to look, and told him to ignore it. It was the absence of a real uniform that did it. People see what they expect to see. And nobody at Eastgate expected anything that morning except the same thing they got every morning. Kessler came through the door with 2 minutes to spare. Did his usual scan of the room, and his eyes moved across the man at the front without stopping. He set his coffee down. He pulled out the chair at the head of the long table. He was just lowering himself into it when the door opened again. And the room changed. Not because of a sound. It changed the way a room changes when someone walks in who outranks everyone in it. A quiet, involuntary shift. Like a current running under the floor. Side conversations died mid-sentence. Someone straightened. Someone put a phone face down. Assistant Chief Priya Raman walked to the front in full dress uniform, shoulders square, and stopped beside the man in the plain jacket. Kessler's hand was still on the back of his chair. He did not sit down. Raman did not look at him. She did not look at anyone in particular. She stood, and she waited. And the waiting was its own kind of pressure. Clean and unhurried, and completely in control. The room reached full silence in about 10 seconds. Boone's eyes went to the man beside her, then back to Raman, then to the man again. And this time he really looked. At the stillness of him. At the way he met no one's eyes because he did not need to. At the fact that he seemed entirely, impossibly unbothered by all of it. Something cold turned over in Boone's chest. He thought about the bucket. He thought about the gray water, and the grin, and the word he had used. And the way the old man had simply looked up at him. Not scared. Not embarrassed. Just steady. And folded a napkin, and squared it with the edge of the table. Raman let the silence run exactly as long as she wanted it to. Then she spoke. Officers of the 12th District. I will keep this brief. She turned slightly toward the man beside her. After a selection process conducted downtown over the past several weeks, Eastgate Station has a new commanding officer. Effective this morning, Captain Solomon Grant. 31 years of service. Former lead liaison to the Federal Violent Crimes Task Force. 3 departmental commendations. All 3 of them for integrity and command. She let it land. Many of you, she said, and something in her tone shifted. Not warmer, but more deliberate. Have already had the chance to meet him this morning. Her eyes moved once, almost imperceptibly, toward the center left of the room. The silence that followed had weight. It pressed down on specific people. And it pressed down hard. The blood left Boone's face. Halpern's jaw went slack. Whitlock looked up, then immediately looked back down at the table. Kessler said nothing. Did nothing. His expression had stopped being an expression and become something else. A careful, rigid blankness. The face of a man performing composure while the floor drops away beneath him. Rahman stepped aside. I will let him take it from here. Solomon Grant walked to the front. He moved without urgency. He set both hands on the edge of the podium and looked out over the room. And he did not look like a man who had just been revealed. He looked like a man who had simply been waiting for the right moment to step forward. And the moment had arrived exactly on schedule. He found Boone first. He held his eyes for 2 long seconds. Then Halpern. Then Whitlock. Then, last and longest, Wade Kessler. Good morning, Grant said. His voice was calm and even, and carried to every corner of the room without being raised. I have had the chance to get a feel for some of you already. He let that stand alone for a moment. I look forward to getting to know all of you properly. He did not smile. He opened the folder in front of him and moved straight into the business of the morning. Shift assignments. 2 beat rotations. A pair of pending case reviews. He was thorough and exact and completely at ease. Running the whole thing the way a man runs something he has run 100 times. Without notes. Without hesitation. Without a single wasted word. Nobody spoke unless he asked them to. When it was over, the room emptied fast. Heads down. Voices barely above a murmur. Kessler's face throughout had stayed the color of paper. In the back row, the officer with the untouched coffee, Camille Ford, let out a long, slow breath. It was the first full breath she had taken all morning. The room cleared inside 4 minutes. Kessler was the last to move. He had hung back near the wall. And now, he crossed toward the podium, with a different walk than the one he had carried in that morning. Slower. More measured. A walk he had recalibrated, somewhere between the door and the front of the room. What he wore now was a performance of ease. The specific ease of a man who badly wants you to believe he is not afraid. He put out his hand. Captain Grant. Wade Kessler. I have been keeping the lights on around here since Commander Alvarez rotated out. Wanted to introduce myself right. Grant looked at the hand. Then he shook it. Ons. Lieutenant Kessler. I know who you are. Something moved behind Kessler's eyes. Brief and quickly buried. Good. Good. Look. I just want you to know I am here to help. 11 weeks running this place. I have got a real handle on how it breathes. The people, the beats, the little rhythms you cannot get off a roster. I would be glad to bring you up to speed. Grant nodded once. I appreciate that. Lieutenant. A pause. I will call on you when I need you. Kessler's smile held perfectly level. Of course. Door is always open. He left. Grant watched him go. Then turned back to his folder and made a small, quiet note. 20 minutes later, Kessler found Boone by the equipment lockers. Relax, he said. Before Boone could open his mouth, keeping his voice low, his back to the corridor, he shook my hand, smiled, did not say one word about this morning. You know what that tells me? The man is a pushover. Came in wanting to look reasonable. Make his little first impression. He is not going to blow up his own opening week over a bucket of mop water. So here is how we play it. Calm. Normal. You did not do a thing wrong. You saw a guy you did not recognize, sitting where he should not be. And you responded. That is the whole story. And you do not add a syllable to it. You do not apologize. You do not bring up this morning. Ever. He wants to look big for a couple of weeks. Let him. We just outlast him. Same as the last three. Boone let out a breath. Kessler clapped him on the shoulder and walked off. And by the time he reached the end of the corridor, he was smiling again. What Kessler did not see was what was happening on the other side of the building. Because Solomon Grant had already scheduled something that looked, from the outside, like the most ordinary thing a new commander does. He was going to sit down with every officer in the station, one at a time, 15 minutes each. Introduction. The calendar invite called them. Getting to know the team. That was how it looked from the outside. From the inside, each one was something else entirely. The introductions ran 2 days. Most of the senior people gave him nothing. Polite. Sealed. Practiced. They had learned to give nothing. It had kept them safe for years. But the younger officers were different. A 26-year-old named Tara Mabry came in for her 15 minutes and left after 40. And by the time she left, she was describing her first 8 months at Eastgate in a steady voice with her hands knotted in her lap. The promotion that went to someone with half her arrests. The complaint she had filed the previous spring that she had never heard back on. The schedule that seemed built, week after week, to keep her working alone. Grant listened without interrupting. He took quiet notes. When she finished, he thanked her and told her she had done the right thing. She looked at him like she was not sure yet whether to believe it. She was the 4th officer to hand him something real. By the end of the 2nd day, she was one of 9, but the one he had been waiting for came to him on her own. And she came because of a 15-year-old kid. A patrol had brought in a boy from the Rennick corridor on a shoplifting call, and Grant had been crossing the bullpen when he saw the kid sitting cuffed to a bench, terrified, trying not to cry in front of a room full of cops. Grant had stopped. He had crouched down to the boy's level, asked him his name, asked if anyone had called his mother, and when the answer was no, he had made sure someone did, and he had made sure the cuff came off the bench while the boy waited, because a scared 15-year-old accused of pocketing a phone charger did not need to be chained to furniture to prove a point. Officer Camille Ford watched the whole thing from the property window. Ford was 34. 8 years on. The last 5 of them at Eastgate. And for most of those 5 years, she had worked the property and records room. The quiet back of the building, where every report, every complaint, every piece of the station's paper memory eventually passed through her hands. She had seen more than anyone at Eastgate understood she had seen. She had also learned, the way you learn things in a place like this, to see it and say nothing. That afternoon she knocked on the frame of Grant's open door. Captain, I want to say something, and then I want to be able to walk out of here and pretend I did not. She stepped in and closed the door behind her without being asked. I have been in the property room 5 years. I log the reports. I log the complaints. I log the ones that come in, and I have watched a lot of them go quiet. I made myself okay with that for a long time, because I told myself it was not my job to fix it and it was not safe to try. This morning I watched you take a cuff off a scared kid instead of leaving him chained to a bench to make a point. And I decided I am done telling myself that. Grant looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened his bottom desk drawer, lifted out a thick folder bound with 2 rubber bands, and set it on the desk between them. Then look at this, and tell me if it matches what you have seen. She peeled off the bands and opened it, and she went still. Inside was everything. Photographed complaint forms with red close stamps across the top, personnel notes with dates in the margins, a timeline running 6 years deep, Darnell Hayes's file, flagged with a yellow tab. Names she recognized. Dates she recognized, things she had seen with her own eyes, and convinced herself no one was writing down. All of it. Written down. I have been building this for 3 weeks, Grant said, before I ever set foot in this building. This morning in the break room was part of it. You watched what happened. It was not a question. Yes, she said quietly. I need someone on the inside of this station. Someone who knows how the paper actually moves here, and can confirm from first-hand experience what I have documented from the outside. He slid a second. Smaller document across the desk. That is a formal cooperation agreement. It routes your account to an independent authority outside this building. And it protects you. Legally. On the record. Ford looked at it. Then up at him. They will figure it out. If I start pulling files, Kessler will know inside a week. Yes, Grant said, which is why the case has to be finished before he does. She looked down at the page for a long moment. Then she picked up the pen, through the angled blinds of the office window, just visible across the bullpen. Wade Kessler stood motionless at his corner desk, watching Grant's closed door. His smile was gone. The next day, Kessler went to work. It started small. It always started small with Kessler. By mid-morning, he had quietly reworked the station's internal mail routing so that administrative reports meant to land on Grant's desk now cycled through an extra approval step. Kessler had inserted to smooth the transition. The result was a backlog, not a dramatic one. Nothing a person could point at and call sabotage. Just enough friction to keep the new commander buried in paper for hours a day. By 9, he had made 2 calls to a soft-spoken union contact downtown who owed him favors and knew it, planting the seed of a question. This new captain, arriving Monday in plain clothes, sitting in the break room without identifying himself, watching officers who did not know he was watching, was that not worth a look? From a fairness standpoint, just raising it, just making sure the union was aware. What Kessler had no way of knowing was that every hour he spent making the building heavy, he was buying Solomon Grant time. Because Grant and Camille Ford had started pulling thread, they did it after hours. In the property and records room at the quiet back of the building, with the overhead lights half off and the dispatch radio crackling somewhere down the hall. On paper, Ford was running a routine records audit. The kind of dull administrative chore nobody looks at twice. In practice, she was walking backward through 6 years of filed complaints, matching dismissal dates against reviewer signatures, against the routing logs that showed which hands each one had passed through. Every thread led to the same place. Every single one. She found the pattern first in the signatures. 9 complaints. 4 years. Everyone reviewed and closed by the same 3-name rotation, with Kessler's initials somewhere in the chain of all 9. She found it again in the timestamps. Reports that had been corrected days after the fact. The corrected version filed clean, while the original quietly vanished from the system. And on the 3rd night, working a bottom shelf nobody had touched in years, she found the thing that turned a pattern into a case, a gray accordion folder, unlabeled, wedged behind a run of dead case boxes. Inside it, paper clipped and dated in Kessler's own blocky hand, were originals, the first drafts of a dozen incident reports. Darnell Hayes's beat. Mostly, before somebody had gone back and softened them, or hardened them, or changed the name of who did what to whom. A shadow archive. The truth Kessler had kept, not to protect anyone, but because a man like Kessler always keeps a copy of the things he can use against someone later. Ford's hands were not quite steady. She did not remove a single page. She photographed each one where it lay. The folder, the shelf, the dates. the desk in context, clean and clear, and she put everything back exactly as she had found it. And she was at her terminal with her screen restored when she heard Kessler's boots come down the hall. She heard his office door pull shut, the lock click. She stared at her screen without reading it. Then she opened her messages and sent Grant 4 photographs and 2 words. Your office? He arrived in 20 minutes. Civilian clothes. No markings. In through the side door. He studied the photographs on her phone without a word, expanding each one. And when he set the phone down on the table between them, he went very still. Not hesitation, but the particular quiet of a man running the numbers faster than he is letting on. An off-book file, he said finally. Originals he kept separate. That contradict what is in the system. That is not carelessness. That is a man keeping leverage, which means we cannot just pull it. Not yet, because the second I move on that folder, through any channel in this building, he knows how much you have found. And he knows it came from records. And there is exactly one person who works records at night. He looked at her. The folder has to be reached the right way, under the right authority, or it is worthless. And worse, it burns you. Document what you saw, exactly as you saw it, and we wait until the case is strong enough that reaching for it is airtight. Ford understood what he was not saying. Every additional person who touched this was another way for it to leak. And one leak was all Kessler needed. She nodded. She gathered her things. They walked out together through the side door into the cold. Ford stopped 3 steps into the lot. Taped to the driver's window of her car, where anyone leaving the building would have to walk past it, was a single sheet of paper. No signature. 6 words. Printed in plain block type. Some audits are not worth the overtime. She looked at it for a long moment without speaking. There is no camera on this corner of the lot, she said quietly. No, Grant said. There is not. He took out his phone and photographed the note methodically. Close. Wide. The car. The surrounding lot. The dead pool of shadow where the nearest light did not reach. Then he called the City Fleet office's after-hours line and requested a camera installed at the northeast corner of the East Gate lot. Official channels. On the record. Time-stamped. He hung up and looked at her. They are guessing, he said. They do not know what you have told me. This is a warning built on suspicion, not information. It means they are nervous. Does that make it better? He met her eyes. No. It makes them sloppy. And sloppy people leave the kind of mistakes you can build a case on. He followed her to her sister's place across town and made sure she got inside. Neither of them said much on the way. That night, Grant did not sleep. He sat at his kitchen table in the dark, with a cup of coffee going cold, and Darnell Hayes's file open in front of him. And he read it the way you read something for the first time even when you have read it 3 times before. Because reading a file in a downtown office and reading it while sitting inside the story it belongs to are 2 different things entirely. He knew the dates by heart. 3rd, in his class. 2 commendations. The letter from Principal Ruiz, who had written that Officer Hayes was the first cop her students had ever asked to come back. And then month 7. And the file turned to ash. He cross-checked the reassignment against the duty logs and found that it came 4 days after Hayes had filed a use-of-force report that named a senior officer. A report whose version in the system did not match the summary Hayes had signed. He read the 2 vague write-ups. He read the 3-page complaint, routed to internal review, reviewed by Kessler, closed for insufficient evidence, never delivered. He read the transfer denied in 48 hours in Kessler's own hand. He read the 2 sentences of resignation, and then the file simply ended. Grant sat with it a long time. He thought about a 31-year-old man that a room full of children had asked to come back. He thought about a career fourth in its class and a uniform folded into a box because fighting it had come to feel like throwing yourself at a wall that does not move. He turned to a clean page in his notebook and wrote Darnell Hayes's name at the top, and beneath it he began a clean, organized summary of every documented incident. Dates, file references, cross-references to the accounts of the officers who had come to him that week. The kind of record that cannot be waved away. He thought about calling Hayes that night. He decided against it. The case was not strong enough yet. And bringing Hayes in too early meant exposing him before the protection was fully in place. When the call came, the ground under it needed to be solid. He owed Darnell Hayes at least that much. He worked until 2, then locked the file in his desk, turned off the lamp, and let the night close over the house. By Thursday, the building felt different, and Grant noticed it the moment he came through the door. Officers who had kept their eyes down all week made brief, direct contact as he passed. A young officer held the equipment room door for him without being asked. The cluster that usually formed around Kessler's corner was thinner, the orbit looser. Small things. But Grant had built a career out of reading small things. And what these small things told him was that the fear in this building had finally found something else to weigh itself against. 3 officers stopped him in the hallway that morning. Separately, one after another, each finding a stretch of empty corridor and a quiet moment. A 24-year-old named Damon Reyes described a pattern of assignments built to make him fail. Impossible numbers. No backup. Write-ups that appeared with no warning. A 10-year officer named Patrice Vaughn handed him a folded photocopy of a complaint she had filed 2 years earlier. Routed to Kessler. Never heard from again. The third said 3 sentences. Asked for nothing. And walked away. Grant added all of it to the file. By noon, the referral was finished. 34 pages. Sourced. Cross-referenced. Dated. Airtight. Raman came without announcement. In through the back, in a gray coat, with a leather portfolio under her arm. She read the referral the way she read everything. Thoroughly. Without expression. Turning each page with the same controlled attention. It took her 20 minutes. When she finished, she closed the folder, set it flat, and looked at him. "This is enough," she said. "I know. I can have this in front of the monitor by tomorrow. Vos opens formal." And the second she does, no one in this city has the authority to close it. Not Kessler. Not the union. Not the deputy mayor. He will not see it coming. "No," Grant said. "He will not." She studied him a moment. "How are you holding up?" He considered it. "Ask me Friday afternoon." She almost smiled, gathered the referral into her portfolio, and stood. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he confirmed. He was wrong about the timing. So was she? Because Wade Kessler had spent 24 years learning to hear a thing coming before it arrived. And somewhere between Monday morning and Thursday noon, someone had told him it was. Grant's phone rang at 9:40 that night. He was still at his desk. The building was dark except for his lamp and the blue glow of the overnight dispatch terminal down the hall. It was Raman. Her voice was different. Clipped. Controlled in the specific way of a person holding very bad news with both hands. "We have a problem." He set down his pen. "Tell me." She talked for 9 minutes. He listened without interrupting. One hand flat on the desk. Eyes fixed on the middle distance. Taking it in the way he took in everything. Not reacting. Not catastrophizing. Just letting the shape of it come clear. And it came clear fast. Kessler had moved first. Sometime that afternoon he had reached Gordon Alcott. and Alcott had spent the back half of the day working the levers only a deputy mayor can reach. Calls that never appear in any log. Pressure applied through channels that leave no paper. By early evening, two things had happened at once. The first was a transfer order, not a demotion. Alcott was far too careful for that. A promotion. Captain Solomon Grant was being elevated. Effective Monday. To command the department's Administrative Compliance Bureau. A windowless downtown office that processed records retention schedules and had not made a decision that mattered in a decade. It was signed by the acting commissioner, a man who, Grant now understood, sat in that chair because Gordon Alcott had put him there. On paper, it was an honor. In practice, it was a coffin, with a nameplate, and it moved Grant out of Eastgate before he could file a thing. The second was a grievance. Duane Halpern, wearing his union delegate's hat, had filed a formal complaint that afternoon, claiming that Grant's Monday morning conduct, arriving in plain clothes, observing officers without identifying himself as their commanding officer, constituted deliberate psychological manipulation and had created a hostile, unsafe environment for department personnel. He is calling it entrapment. Rahman said, "He is calling your first morning on the job entrapment." And Boone and two others have signed supporting statements. The union is backing it publicly tomorrow. And Alcott's people are already feeding a columnist at the Calder Ledger. By morning, there will be a piece asking why downtown parachuted a hand-picked outsider into Eastgate over the objections of the rank and file. The room was very quiet. So it is the whole machine. Grant said, Kessler, the union, the deputy mayor, and the man Alcott made acting commissioner. Yes. A pause. Heavier than the last. Solomon. The transfer is legal. The grievance is filed. The referral I was going to walk into the monitor's office tomorrow is 34 pages of the truth. And as of tonight, there is no clean channel inside this department left to receive it. He did not beat the evidence. He beat the system that is supposed to process it. The silence had weight. Grant looked at the sealed referral in his desk drawer. 6 years of documented cruelty. Every complaint. Every buried transfer. Every name. Every date. All of it real. All of it thorough. And all of it useless without a legitimate hand to put it in. Go home, Rahman said quietly. Get some rest. We will figure it out tomorrow. Yes, he said. Good night. Priya. He hung up. He sat in the lamplight a long time without moving. Then he did two things. The first, he picked up his phone, scrolled to a number he had saved 3 weeks ago and hoped he would not have to dial this soon, and pressed call. Darnell Hayes picked up on the 4th ring. His voice was thick with sleep and something older than sleep. A weariness that had settled into him, the way things settle when they have been there long enough to stop feeling like a choice. Hello. Darnell. Grant kept his voice quiet and level. My name is Solomon Grant. I am the new commanding officer at Eastgate. Silence. Not the silence of a man who had fallen back asleep. The silence of a man who had gone very still. I have read your file. All of it. Every complaint. Every write-up. Every date. I know what they did to you in that building. The silence stretched a few seconds more. Then Darnell Hayes said, I always wondered if anybody ever would. They talked for 2 hours. Grant sat at his kitchen table in the dark and listened the way he had trained himself to listen over 31 years. Completely. Without rushing. Without filling the quiet with his own voice. Darnell talked slowly at first. Carefully. The way you talk about a thing that hurt you badly when you are not sure the person on the other end has earned the whole truth of it. He talked about the first 6 months, the commendations, the letter from Principal Ruiz, the genuine, uncomplicated belief that he had found the place he was supposed to be. Then he talked about what came after: the reassignment, the write-ups landing in his file like ambushes, the complaint that vanished, the transfer denied in 2 days. The morning he had sat in his car in the Eastgate lot for 45 minutes and then driven home instead of going in. I kept records, Darnell said. Grant looked up from his notebook. What kind? Voice memos. Every shift. I would sit in my car after and just say it into my phone. What happened? Who said what? The date? Dozens of them. I never played them for anybody. I did not think anybody would listen. And copies. 3 of the original reports before they got changed. I made photocopies the day I filed them. Because something told me to. They are in a shoebox in my mother's garage. I am listening, Grant said. And so is a federal court. If you will let it. A longer silence. I have got a son, Darnell said. Micah. He is 11 now. He was 7 when I walked out of that place. For 4 years I have told myself it did not matter. That I did the right thing letting it go. That a man has got to know when to stop bleeding for a badge that never wanted him. I need you to tell me this is real. That something actually happens this time. It is real, Grant said. But I have to ask you for something hard. Ask it. I need you to come back into that building. Not tonight. One morning. This week. In uniform. He waited. I know exactly what I am asking. The silence on the other end was the longest yet. You want me to walk back in there? In front of all of them? Yes. Grant heard him breathe once. Slow. In and out. Tell me what you have got. Grant told him. Not everything. Not the operational pieces. Not the names he was still protecting. But enough. The file. The pattern. 6 years of buried complaints. The scope of what was coming. And the one thing that could carry it past every wall Alcott had put up. When he finished, Darnell was quiet a moment. Okay, he said finally. Okay. Tell me what time. Grant hung up and sat with the phone in his hand. It was 2:15 in the morning. Then he did the second thing. He scrolled to a name he had saved 3 weeks ago. Eleanor Voss. Federal Monitor. And he pressed call. Because the moment Gordon Alcott's acting commissioner signed a transfer order timed to pull the one investigator in the building off an active civil rights inquiry, the whole thing had crossed a line that no deputy mayor in America has the authority to uncross. Voss picked up on the second ring. She had been awake. Captain Grant. It is late. They transferred me out tonight, he said. Effective Monday. Signed by the acting commissioner, the man the deputy mayor installed, and the union filed a coordinated grievance the same afternoon. To give it cover. All of it timed to end an inquiry your office flagged twice. A pause. Brief and exact. That is obstruction. Voss said. Of a matter under this court's decree. Yes. He heard the click of a lamp. The sound of paper moving. Then it is no longer their decision to make. Be at Eastgate at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Front entrance. And Captain. Do not file anything through the department tonight. Bring it to me in person. I want a clean chain of custody on every page. Understood, he said. He hung up. He closed his notebook. He did not sleep. Solomon Grant arrived at Eastgate at 7:45 the next morning, in full dress uniform. 31 years of service on his chest. Gold captain's bars catching the light. Mirror-bright shoes. Shined again. The same shoes a young man had drowned in gray water 5 days ago, while a room full of officers laughed. He walked in through the front entrance with his shoulders squared and his face composed. And he went straight to the roll call room. And he stood at the front. And he waited. He did not pace. He did not check his watch. He stood the way he had stood his entire career, like a man who had already decided how the morning would go, and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. Officers began filtering in at 8. Mid-conversation, coffee in hand, half asleep. One by one, they registered the old man at the front in full dress uniform, and the conversations died in their throats, and the room filled in silence. Kessler arrived at 20 past, already carrying his confidence like a weapon. Back-channel word had reached him overnight through the union. The transfer signed, the grievance filed, the ledger piece dropping that morning, the deputy mayor's people moving downtown. He had walked in expecting to find a cornered man at the front of the room, a beaten commander running out the clock on his last week in a building that had already spit him out. He found Solomon Grant standing at the podium like he owned it. Because he did, Kessler took his seat. His face gave away nothing, but Grant watched his eyes make a quick calculation. The uniform, the posture, the stillness, and come up uncertain for the first time all week. Boone came in a minute later, saw the gray-haired man he had told to crawl, now standing in gold at the head of the room, and the color went out of his face in a single slow wave, like water draining from a glass. At 25 past, Camille Ford slipped in and took a seat near the back. She looked at Grant once. He gave her nothing. She understood. At 28 past, Assistant Chief Priya Raman came through the side door in full dress and positioned herself to the right of the podium without a word. Several officers straightened in their chairs. And, at exactly 8:30, Solomon Grant heard the front door of the station open. The room did not hear them coming. It felt them. A change in the air near the hallway. A shift in the building's pressure, like the drop before a storm turns on shore. Boots in the corridor. More than a few, moving with the unhurried certainty of people who do not need to rush because nothing in the building can stop them. Then the roll call door opened, and they came in. Eleanor Voss came first. She was 58, compact and unhurried, with the bearing of a woman who had spent 25 years in federal courtrooms and never once lost her footing in one. She wore a dark suit and carried a leather portfolio, and she crossed to the side of the room without looking at anyone in particular, which somehow made every eye in the room find her. Beside her walked a woman with the state seal on her credentials. Assistant Attorney General Yvette Barrera of the Public Integrity Unit. And behind them came 4 investigators from the department's own Force Investigation Division, who moved to the corners of the room and the doorway, and stood there, and did not sit, and did not leave. The exits were not blocked. They did not have to be. Everyone in that room understood, in the marrow, that the building was no longer theirs. The silence was total, and then the door opened a second time, and Darnell Hayes walked in. He was 35 now, and he wore his old dress uniform, pressed and straight, the crease sharp, the shoes gleaming. He had clearly spent the night on it. He stood in the doorway for just a moment, and Solomon Grant could see exactly what it cost him to be here. In this building, in front of these people. We could see it in the set of his jaw, and in the way his hands stayed perfectly still at his sides through what had to be an enormous act of will. 4 years ago, he had walked out of this room, a broken man with a box under his arm. Now, he walked back into it in uniform, upright, and he found a place to stand along the left wall. And his eyes moved once across the room and settled on Wade Kessler. Kessler looked back at him, and for one instant, something crossed his face that he could not bury. Something raw and ugly and afraid. There, and gone. Grant stepped to the podium. "Good morning," he said. "Before we begin the shift, I have some introductions to make." He introduced Voss, and her office, and her title. Plainly, the way you state a fact that needs no decoration. Then Eleanor Voss stepped forward, and she did not raise her voice. And she did not need to, because every word landed like a door closing. The Federal Monitor's Office, in coordination with the State Attorney General's Public Integrity Unit, has as of 6 o'clock this morning opened a formal investigation into the 12th District. She said, that investigation covers systematic civil rights violations, racially discriminatory assignment and discipline practices, the targeted harassment of officers on the basis of race, the suppression, alteration, and destruction of formal complaints over a period of no less than 6 years, and, as of last night, the obstruction of an inquiry conducted under the direct authority of a federal consent decree. This matter is now active. It is beyond the authority of this station, this department, this union, or this city to close, delay, reassign, or bury. Every record in this building is under a federal preservation order effective immediately. Anyone who alters or destroys a single page of it, or who retaliates against a single witness, will answer for that personally, in federal court, and I promise you the paperwork on my desk already has room for your name. The fluorescent lights hummed. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Grant turned slightly. "Officer Hayes," he said quietly. "Is there anything you would like to say?" Darnell Hayes stepped away from the wall. He looked at the room first, at all of it, at the men who had laughed, and the men who had signed their names, and the men who had only ever stayed silent. And then he looked directly at Wade Kessler. And when his voice came, it was steady and clear, and left no room anywhere for misunderstanding. 4 years ago, you took a kid who graduated third in his class and loved this job more than anything in the world. And you spent 12 months teaching him that the color of his skin made him worth less than the badge he wore. He said, "You buried my complaint. You forged my reports. You made me believe it was my fault, and that nobody would ever write it down. You were wrong on every single count." He paused, and his gaze moved once around the room. "I did not come back for an apology. I do not want one. I would not take it. I came back because I have got a son, and he is 11. And one day he might put on this same uniform, and I need him to walk into a building where the man who tried to break his father is gone, and the record that says what happened is real, and permanent, and signed. I came back so the next one does not have to bleed for the right to wear the badge. That is the whole reason I am standing here, and I am done being quiet." The room was silent enough to hear the lights burn. Nobody spoke for a long moment after Darnell Hayes stepped back. The silence was enormous. It pressed down on the room and filled every corner and settled over every officer like a judgment they could not step out from under. The men who had laughed in the break room on Monday sat with their eyes fixed on the tables in front of them. The men who had signed their names to Halpern's grievance without a second thought stared at the far wall like they were looking for a door that was not there. Nobody looked at Kessler. Kessler looked at nothing. Raman stepped forward, a single sheet of paper in her right hand, and moved to the front of the room at the slow, deliberate pace of someone who understood that speed would rob the moment of what it deserved. She had waited a long time. She was not going to rush. Lieutenant Wade Kessler. The name landed like a stone dropped in still water. Kessler looked up. His face had gone somewhere. Faces go when every wall a man has built over 24 years comes down in the same instant. A rigid, terrible blankness. Like a building the second after the supports fail and before the dust has fallen. He was performing composure. His body was betraying him anyway. Effective immediately. You are relieved of duty and placed on administrative suspension pending the outcome of the federal and state investigation opened this morning. You will surrender your badge and your service weapon before you leave this building." She stopped. The room waited. Kessler stood. The movement was slow and stiff, like a man whose body had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He unclipped his badge and held it in his palm for a moment. 24 years. Then he set it down on the long table at the front of the room. And the sound it made, that small, flat, metallic click against the surface, was the loudest thing anyone in that room had ever heard. He cleared his sidearm with the mechanical efficiency of long practice and laid it beside the badge. And his hands, both of them, were shaking with a fine tremor that ran from his wrists to his fingertips and would not stop. Then Yvette Barrera stepped forward and opened her portfolio. And she turned her eyes on Travis Boone. Officer Travis Boone. Boone looked up, and for one unguarded second, his face was completely open. Stripped of the grin. Stripped of the performance. Stripped of everything that Monday morning had been built on. And what was underneath was something very small. "I am going to read something into the record," Barrera said, "and I want every person in this room to hear it. 5 days ago, in the break room of this station, in front of at least 11 witnesses, you approached your commanding officer, who was at that time out of uniform, and you called him, and I am quoting from 3 sworn statements taken this week, an old black animal. You told him he was not fit to breathe the same air as real officers. You ordered him to get down on his knees and crawl. You threw a bucket of dirty water onto him, and you told him you would throw his worthless self out onto the curb where people like him belong." She let each sentence stand by itself. You were speaking to a captain with 31 years of service and 3 commendations for integrity, but it would not have mattered one bit if he had been the janitor you took him for. Not one bit. She looked up from the page. "Travis Boone, you are formally charged with assault and harassment under color of law, with the deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and with conduct unbecoming an officer. These charges are supported by documented evidence, time-stamped records, the sworn statements of your fellow officers, and the testimony of Captain Solomon Grant. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately. You will surrender your credentials." Boone's mouth opened. Something started to come out of it. A protest. A reflex. The last automatic reach for a world where he could still talk his way out of anything. The look on Barrera's face killed it in his throat. He stood, and his fingers fumbled the badge pin once, twice, 3 times before it came free, and he walked it up to the front of the room, and he set it down on the table beside Kessler's, and that was when it happened. The thing the hook promised you. The thing this whole week had been building toward. Onabi won. They were called. And one by one they came. And one by one they set their badges down on that long table at the front of the room. Until there was a pile of them. Dull metal catching the fluorescent light. In front of the very man they had told to pick up a mop. Halper next. Informed that his signed grievance, the one he had put his name to, without hesitation, to help bury a captain who had done nothing wrong, had been flagged as potential evidence of coordinated criminal retaliation against a commanding officer, and was now the property of a federal case. His face collapsed through 3 expressions in 4 seconds. Then the 2 officers who had signed alongside him, both of them staring at the growing pile of badges like men watching their own funerals. Whitlock was not charged, but she sat with both hands flat on the table, pressing down like she needed to feel something solid under them. And she stared at a fixed point on the wall. And she did not cry. But it was close, because she had laughed. She had sat at that table on Monday and laughed at an old man on his knees in dirty water. And she had known, on the level where you always know even when you choose not to, exactly what she was laughing at. Now the bill had come, and it was written in her own silence. Every one of those badges came to rest in front of Solomon Grant. He did not touch a single one. He did not need to. He just stood there in full dress uniform, with his hands loose at his sides, and let the room understand what it was looking at. Because 5 days ago, these were the men who ran Eastgate, who decided whose complaint lived and whose died, whose career survived and whose ended in a box. And now every scrap of that power was lying on a table in a pile in front of the man they had decided was garbage. They walked Kessler out first. His back was straight and his face was empty. And he did not look at Boone. And he did not look at Halpern. And he did not look at Whitlock. And when he passed within 4 feet of Darnell Hayes on his way to the door, he did not look at him either. Darnell did not move. He stood with his hands at his sides and watched Kessler pass. With an expression that carried 4 years of a man's life in it, the door swung shut behind Kessler, with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. They walked Boone out last. And here is the part I want you to sit with. He was escorted through the front doors of Eastgate Station and out onto the sidewalk, where his personal effects were waiting in a cardboard box because he was no longer permitted past the lobby. And he stood there on the curb in the cold gray morning with the box in his hands. The curb, the exact place he had promised 5 days earlier, to throw an old black man he had decided was worthless. He had told Solomon Grant that people like him belonged out on the curb. And in the end, the curb was waiting. And it was not for the janitor. It was for him. The rest of the machine came apart before lunch. Gordon Alcott's office got the call from the Monitors Council at 10:50 that morning. And by the second sentence, the deputy mayor had sat down. Because federal obstruction is not a thing you manage quietly over a budget lunch. The transfer order, the promotion Alcott had been so proud of, so certain was clean, had been identified in the case file as a deliberate move to derail an active civil rights inquiry, and it was now sitting in front of people who owed Gordon Alcott exactly nothing. The ledger column, already written, was killed by an editor who did not want the paper's name inside a federal filing. Alcott canceled his afternoon and did not return a single call for the rest of the day. And by 11:30, the acting commissioner's office, the man Alcott himself had installed, released a 4-sentence statement of full support for the Monitor's investigation, in which neither Alcott's name nor his signature appeared anywhere at all. The man he had made had decided, in the space of a single morning, that he had never met him. But the badges on the table were never the real victory. And Solomon Grant knew it. Punishing 4 men does not fix a building. So this is what he did with the wreckage. Over the following weeks, under the authority of the consent decree, and with Eleanor Voss standing behind every line of it, Grant tore Eastgate down to the studs and rebuilt it. Body cameras required for every interaction inside the station, not just on the street, but in the halls, in the holding area, in the roll call room itself, so that no old man out of uniform would ever again be a piece of garbage nobody thought to record. A complaint process rerouted to bypass the station's chain of command entirely and land directly with the Monitor's office, where no Wade Kessler could ever bury it in a drawer. A civilian review panel with real subpoena power and a real budget, and a full forensic audit of every altered report in that gray accordion folder and the 6 years of files around it. Because a report that has been forged is a report that put a lie into the record with a badge behind it. And somewhere out in Calder City were people who had been charged, and some of them convicted, on those lies. Cases began to reopen. And quietly, one at a time, men and women who had been sitting behind Kessler's forgery started coming home, with an apology 4 years late and a record wiped clean. And every one of those was a door that Darnell Hayes' shoebox of photocopies helped to open. Camille Ford was put up for the detective track that same week. Grant called her into his office, and he stayed standing. And he told her that her cooperation and her nerve were now a permanent part of the federal record. And then he handed her the application. "I want to be clear," he said. "This is not a reward for what you did this week. I have watched you work. The way you think. The way you read a room. The way you handle the truth, even when it is inconvenient to you personally. You should have been on this track 2 years ago." Ford pressed her lips together and looked at the page for a long moment. "My mother," she said finally, "is going to be insufferable about this." Something moved across Grant's face that was almost, not quite, but almost, a smile. "Tell her she raised someone worth being insufferable about," he said. "And there was one more thing. And it did not happen in an office." Before Darnell Hayes left the building that first morning, Grant walked him back to the row of lockers at the far end of the station. The same lockers he had cleaned out 4 years ago. And Grant took something out of his pocket and held it out on his open palm. An Academy Challenge coin, scuffed at the edge. The enamel worn thin on one face from a thumb that had rubbed it 1,000 times. "A rookie found this in the back of your locker the week after you left," Grant said. He did not know what to do with it. So he kept it. "When I started asking questions in this building, he brought it to me. He said it did not feel right for it to be sitting in a drawer. It is yours. It was always yours." Darnell took the coin. He turned it over once. And something in his face that had been held rigid all morning finally, quietly, let go. And he closed his hand around it. They offered him reinstatement that afternoon. Full seniority. Back pay. His badge. A clean slate. And he did not decide right away. And Grant did not push. Because some things a man has to walk toward in his own time. But he agreed to one thing before he left. To come back the next month and stand in front of the incoming academy class, 30 people about to take the oath, and tell them the truth about what it costs, and what it is worth, and what to do when the building goes heavy. So the next one sees it coming. He said. So the next one knows. Somebody wrote it down. And he walked out through the front doors of Eastgate into the afternoon, the coin warm in his fist. And for the first time in 4 years, he did not feel the building at his back like a hand pressing down. At 1:30, Solomon Grant carried a lunch tray into the break room, and he sat down at the small table by the wall. The same table, the same seat, and he looked, for just a moment, at the stretch of tile beside his chair, the exact place where 5 days ago a young man had thrown a bucket of gray water across 31 years of shined leather and ordered him to crawl. Nobody was crawling in his building now. The mop was back in its closet where it belonged, and the man they had told to pick it up was sitting at the head of everything. Then the break room door opened, and Camille Ford came in with her own tray and sat down across from him without being asked and without explanation, because none was needed. Then it opened again, and young Damon Reyes stood in it holding his lunch, uncertain of the rules of a world that had just changed under his feet. And Grant looked up and said, "Plenty of room. Officer Reyes." Reyes sat. Tara Mabry followed a minute later, and then Patrice Vaughn. And the small table by the wall filled up, and Solomon Grant picked up his fork and ate. While outside the windows, Calder City moved through its afternoon, unaware, unhurried, carrying on. And inside Eastgate Station, something that had been broken for a very long time, quietly, finally, began to heal. They had thrown dirty water on his shoes and called him an animal and told him to crawl for the right to stand in their precinct. What men like that never understand. Not until the morning the door swings shut behind them and the curb is waiting. Is that dignity was never something he needed their permission to hold. He carried it in through that side door on Monday, in a plain jacket they did not bother to look at twice. It was the one thing in that entire building they could never take from him, because it was never theirs to give. So here is the question I want to leave you with, and I want you to sit with it honestly before you answer. The man who threw that bucket was not the only person in the room. There was a whole wall of officers who laughed, and a whole building of people who saw it, and heard about it, and told themselves it was not their fight. Cruelty like that does not survive on the cruel alone. It survives on the silence around them. So which one were you? The last time you watched something like this happen? The one who threw the water? The one who laughed? The one who looked away? Or the one who finally decided to write it down? And which one do you want to be the next time? Tell me in the comments. And tell me the truth. Tell me where you are watching from. And tell me what you would have done if you had been standing against that wall. If this story moved you, give it a like so it reaches one more person who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because tomorrow I have got another one for you, about a woman that everyone in the building underestimated. Right up until the moment she stopped letting them. You will not want to miss it. Take care of each other out there. And never let anyone convince you that your dignity is theirs to hand out. I will see you in the next